Jonah bought the Chevy solely for its engine parts, or so he believed. But his saw blade jammed against a rigid metal box buried under 50 years of dried mud. It wasn't a factory component, it was a compartment sealed against radiation, and the moment he broke the seal, he realized he was no longer alone. Jonah Gable stood in the parking lot of the Callaway County Fairgrounds, staring at lot number 47 with the kind of desperation that makes men do stupid things. $200. That was all he had left in the world, and everyone laughed when he raised his hand at the auction. The auctioneer hesitated like he was waiting for the punchline. People whispered. Marcus Reeves, the real estate developer, shook his head with disdain. Even Sally Morton, the clerk organizing the paperwork, looked at Jonah with something between pity and disbelief. But there was something about that truck, Lot 47, that nobody else had noticed. Something in the way it sat apart from the other vehicles, hidden in the corner like it didn't want to be found. A 1960 Chevrolet Apache, painted a faded matte green, more rust than metal, covered in moss like it had grown roots into the earth itself. The auctioneer's voice echoed across the fairground. Sold to Mr. Gable for $200. The crowd chuckled. Marcus Reeves muttered loud enough for everyone to hear, throwing good money after bad. Jonah didn't care. For 10 years, he'd been fighting the system that stripped him of his pension after the bridge collapse that wasn't his fault. For 10 years, he'd watched his farm fall into ruin while lawyers got rich and judges rubber-stamped decisions that destroyed lives. He needed that engine. The generator on his property had died 3 months ago, and without power, he couldn't pump water for the cattle he was barely keeping alive. When Jonah signed the papers with a trembling hand, Sally whispered, "Hope you find at least what you paid for." She didn't know that inside that rusted hulk was something that would question everything the town of Blind River knew about its own history. And Jonah had no idea his life was about to split into 2 parts, before and after opening that door. The key fought against the lock. Jonah had to use WD-40 from his toolbox and force it for a solid 20 minutes before the driver's door finally groaned open. The smell that came out was different. Not mold or abandonment. Something cleaner, almost deliberate, like someone had sealed it carefully. Jonah climbed into the cab and immediately noticed details that didn't make sense. The seats had been reupholstered recently, maybe 15 years ago, not 60. The dashboard had strange modifications, holes that looked like they'd been drilled from microphones, wires running under the panels that led nowhere visible. He started examining the truck methodically, the way an engineer examines a structure. Checked the frame, the suspension, the engine block. Everything was deteriorated but standard for a vehicle that old, until he got to the passenger side floor. The metal there was different, thicker. When he tapped it with his wrench, the sound was dull, dense, not hollow like the rest of the floor. Jonah grabbed his angle grinder from the truck bed and started cutting. Sparks flew as the blade bit into metal that shouldn't have been that thick. After 40 minutes of cutting, sweating despite the November cold, he finally broke through. But underneath the steel floor wasn't the ground. It was another layer. Lead. Someone had welded a lead-lined compartment into the floor of a 60-year-old pickup truck. Someone had gone to extreme lengths to hide something and protect it from deterioration. Jonah's hands shook as he pried open the hidden box. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, were 3 items. 5 reels of magnetic audio tape, carefully labeled with dates from 1964, a leather-bound diary, its pages yellowed but intact, and a Smith & Wesson revolver with one spent casing still in the chamber. He opened the diary to the first page. The handwriting was clear, deliberate. "My name is Thomas Bennett. If you're reading this, I'm dead. They killed me for what I know, but I've made sure the truth won't die with me. Listen to the tapes, all of them. Then decide if Blind River deserves to keep its secrets." Jonah felt the ground shift beneath his feet. Thomas Bennett. He knew that name. Everyone in Blind River knew that name. Thomas Bennett had been the town drunk who drowned in the river in 1964, too intoxicated to save himself according to the official report. His death had been ruled an accident, and his niece had been raised by distant relatives who never questioned the story. But if Thomas Bennett had hidden evidence before his death, if he'd modified this truck to preserve what he knew, then everything about that accident was a lie. Jonah looked at the tapes. Each one was labeled with a date and a cryptic note. March 14th, 1964, the meeting. April 3rd, 1964, final plans. April 27th, 1964, the night before. May 2, 1964, aftermath. May 15th, 1964, insurance. He needed equipment to play magnetic tape from 1964, and he needed to do this carefully, Because if Thomas Bennett had been killed for what was on these reels, whoever had killed him was probably still alive and still powerful enough to kill again. The sound of a vehicle approaching made Jonah look up sharply. A black SUV with tinted windows was pulling into the fairground parking lot, moving slowly like it was searching for something, or someone. Jonah quickly stuffed the diary and tapes back into the compartment and slid the cut metal panel over it. He climbed out of the truck, trying to look casual, like he'd just been inspecting his purchase. The SUV stopped 20 feet away. The door opened, and a man stepped out. Tall, mid-40s, wearing a sheriff's deputy uniform but moving with the confidence of someone who answered to no law but his own. Jonah recognized him. Cale Drummond, Judge Thorne's personal enforcer disguised as law enforcement. "Jonah Gable," Cale said, his voice friendly but his eyes cold. "Heard you bought yourself some junk today." "Just looking for parts," Jonah replied, keeping his voice steady. "Generator's dead." Kyle walked around the truck slowly, examining it like a predator examining prey. His hand ran along the hood, the side panels, lingering too long on the passenger door. "Funny thing about old vehicles," Kyle said. "Sometimes they have more value than people realize. Sometimes people pay good money for trucks that look like trash, just because they have sentimental value." Jonah's stomach tightened. Cale knew. Somehow, he knew. "This particular truck," Cale continued, "belonged to a man named Thomas Bennett. You know that name?" "Everyone knows that name. Town drunk who drowned 60 years ago." Cale smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "That's right. Accident. Tragedy. Ancient history." He paused, his eyes locking onto Jonah's. "Some people think there might be more to that story. Some people think Thomas Bennett might have left something behind. Something that should stay buried." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Good." Cale took a step closer. "Let's keep it that way. Because Blind River is a small town, and small towns have long memories. People who dig up the past sometimes find more than they bargained for. Sometimes they end up like Thomas Bennett." The threat was clear. Jonah held Cale's gaze, refusing to show fear. "I bought a truck for parts. That's all." Kyle stared at him for a long moment, then turned and walked back to his SUV. Before getting in, he called out, "Judge Thorne is having a centennial gala next month at the dam, celebrating 100 years of prosperity in Blind River. You should come. It's important to remember where our town came from, who built it, who keeps it running." The SUV drove away, leaving a cloud of dust and a message Jonah understood perfectly. They were watching. They knew he had the truck, and if he found what Thomas Bennett had hidden, he wouldn't live long enough to tell anyone. Jonah waited until the SUV disappeared completely before returning to the truck. He had to move fast, had to get the truck to his property, had to find a way to play those tapes without anyone knowing. But more importantly, he needed to find someone who could help him understand what he'd discovered. There was only one person in Blind River who might care about Thomas Bennett's real story. Thomas Bennett's grandniece, Claire Bennett, the journalist who'd been trying to prove her great-uncle's death wasn't an accident for the last 5 years. The question was, could Jonah trust her? And more importantly, would she trust him? As Jonah fired up the old Chevy's engine, which turned over on the third try, surprisingly strong for its age, he realized he was crossing a line he couldn't uncross. Whatever was on those tapes had been worth killing for 60 years ago. And judging by Cale's visit, it was still worth killing for today. The truck rumbled out of the fairground and onto the winding road that led to Jonah's farm. In his rearview mirror, Jonah saw another vehicle pull out from the tree line and begin following him at a distance. The hunt had already begun. Claire Bennett sat in the cluttered back office of the Blind River Gazette, staring at the termination notice on her computer screen. Effective immediately due to ethical violations and repeated insubordination. She'd known it was coming. Had known since she'd published her article questioning the official history of the 1964 flood, the one that had supposedly been a natural disaster but had coincidentally allowed Judge Silas Thorne's family to buy up half the county for pennies on the dollar. Her editor, Martin Cross, had called her into his office 2 hours ago. Sat her down. Explained very carefully that sometimes journalists need to know when to let sleeping dogs lie. That Blind River was a small town that depended on the Thorne family's resort for its economic survival. That digging up 60-year-old tragedies helped no one and hurt everyone. When Claire had asked if the Gazette was supposed to publish truth or propaganda, Martin had sighed and said, "We publish what keeps our doors open." Now those doors were closed to her. Claire packed her desk into a cardboard box. 5 years of work, 5 years of FOIA requests, interviews with elderly residents who remembered things differently than the official record. Geological surveys that showed the levee failure wasn't natural. All of it dismissed as conspiracy theory by a woman who couldn't let go of her great-uncle's death. But Claire knew Thomas Bennett hadn't been a drunk. Her grandmother had told her stories before she died. Stories about a man who'd been a union organizer, who'd been asking dangerous questions about where the Thorne family's money really came from, who'd told his sister he had insurance if anything happened to him. That insurance had never been found. Until now, apparently. Claire's phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Claire Bennett? Who is this? My name is Jonah Gable. I bought something today that belonged to your great-uncle. I think we need to talk. They met at the abandoned grain mill on the edge of town, a location Claire suggested because it was public enough to be safe but isolated enough for privacy. Jonah arrived first, parking the old Chevy behind the mill where it wouldn't be visible from the road. He'd spent the last 3 hours installing a tarp over the cut floor panel and had brought one of the tape reels in his jacket. Claire arrived 10 minutes later, driving a beat-up Honda Civic that had seen better days. She was younger than Jonah expected, late 20s, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and eyes that evaluated everything with journalist precision. She climbed out of her car and walked toward him, keeping her distance. You said you have something of Thomas Bennett's. I bought his truck at auction this morning. Found a hidden compartment in the floor. Claire's expression shifted immediately. Years of skepticism and grief crystallizing into sharp focus. Show me. Jonah pulled out the tape reel. Claire took it with trembling hands, reading the label. March 14th, 1964. The meeting. There are 5 of these, Jonah said, plus a diary and a revolver with one spent casing. Jesus, Claire whispered. He did it. He actually left proof. Proof of what? Claire looked up at him. That my great-uncle was murdered. That the flood wasn't an accident. That this entire town is built on a mass grave and a lie. Jonah felt his chest tighten. He'd suspected the tapes were important, but hearing it stated so bluntly made the danger real. What flood? Claire took a breath, organizing her thoughts like she was writing an article. May 1964, heavy rains. The levee at Blind River failed and flooded the lower valley. 73 people died, mostly from the black community that had settled there after the Civil War. The official story was that it was a natural disaster. Tragic, but unavoidable. But your great-uncle didn't believe that. My great-uncle had evidence that Judge Silas Thorne, who was just a young lawyer back then, had paid state officials to weaken the levee deliberately. The Thorne family wanted that land. It had mineral rights, water access, and sat at the perfect location for what's now the Blind River Resort. So they drowned 73 people to get it, and then bought the land for nothing when the survivors fled. My great-uncle was a union organizer at the limestone quarry. He'd been investigating workplace safety violations when he stumbled onto documents about the levee. Started asking questions, started recording conversations. Claire held up the reel. If this is what I think it is, it's the proof I've been looking for my entire life. Jonah nodded. We need equipment to play it, reel to reel from the 60s. I know someone. Old-timer named Harold Voss, used to run the town's radio station before it went digital. He has a collection of vintage equipment. Can we trust him? Claire considered the question. Harold's old enough to remember when things were different, before the Thornes owned everything. Yeah, I think we can trust him. Jonah looked around the abandoned mill, suddenly aware of how exposed they were. Cale Drummond already visited me. Knows I have the truck. Made it clear what happens to people who dig up the past. Cale is Thorne's attack dog. Has been for 20 years. If he's already on you, we don't have much time. Then we move fast. Listen to the tapes, figure out what we have, and decide what to do with it. Claire met his eyes. I already know what we do with it. We expose everything. We make sure the whole world knows what Silas Thorne did. I don't care about justice, Jonah said bluntly. I care about leverage. The county court stole my pension, ruined my life. If these tapes are what you say they are, they're worth millions in settlement. Claire's expression hardened. 73 people died. You want to profit off their graves? I want to survive. That's the difference between idealists and people who've already lost everything. The tension between them was immediate and sharp. Claire took a step back, reassessing the man in front of her. If you try to use this for blackmail, I'll expose you along with Thorne. And if you try to publish before we have protection, you'll end up like your great-uncle. They stared at each other, neither backing down, until finally Jonah sighed. We need each other. You need someone who isn't afraid of getting their hands dirty. I need someone who knows how to navigate this story. So let's make a deal. We listen to the tapes together, we protect the evidence together, and when this is over, We both get what we want. Claire considered, then extended her hand. Deal. But if you double-cross me, I'll destroy you. Likewise. They shook hands, sealing an alliance neither of them trusted, bound together by a 60-year-old secret that was already trying to kill them. As they walked back to their vehicles, neither noticed the telephoto lens watching them from the tree line half a mile away. Harold Voss lived in a small house on the outskirts of Blind River, surrounded by satellite dishes and radio antennas that made his property look like a telecommunications hub from the Cold War. He'd been the town's radio voice for 40 years before digital streaming made his station obsolete. When Claire knocked on his door at 8 p.m., Harold opened it with the wariness of a man who'd learned not to trust unexpected visitors. He was 76, thin as a rail, with liver-spotted hands that shook slightly, but eyes that were still sharp. "Claire Bennett," he said. "Heard you got fired today. News travels fast. In Blind River, bad news travels faster than good." He noticed Jonah standing behind her. "Who's your friend?" "Jonah Gable. He needs your help with something from 1964. Harold's eyes narrowed. 1964 was a bad year. Nothing good comes from digging in that dirt. "Please, Harold. It's about Thomas Bennett." The old man's face changed. Something like recognition and fear passed across it. He looked around the darkening street, then stepped aside. "Get in here before someone sees you." The inside of Harold's house was a museum of audio equipment. Shelves lined every wall, filled with tape recorders, mixing boards, turntables, and equipment Jonah couldn't even identify. The air smelled like old electronics and coffee. Harold led them to his workshop, a converted garage filled with even more equipment. "Show me what you have." Jonah pulled out the first tape reel. Harold's hands trembled as he took it, reading the label. "Sweet Jesus," Harold whispered. "You found them." "You knew about these?" Claire asked. Harold nodded slowly. "Thomas came to me 3 days before he died, brought these tapes, asked me to hide them, said if anything happened to him, I should get them to someone who could do something with them. But I was young, had a family, got scared when he turned up dead. You gave them back." "Gave them back to someone I thought Thomas trusted. Another organizer from the quarry, a man named Dennis Carr. 2 days later, Dennis disappeared too. I thought the tapes were destroyed." "Where did you find them?" "Hidden in Thomas's truck," Jonah said. "Sealed in a lead-lined compartment." Harold's eyes widened. "Thomas must have put them there after I gave them to Dennis. Must have known something was wrong." He looked at the tape with reverence. "What do you want me to do?" "Play them," Claire said. "All of them. We need to know what's on here." Harold moved to a large reel-to-reel machine, one of the few pieces of equipment that looked operational rather than decorative. His hands still shook as he threaded the tape carefully onto the spools. "This is fragile," he warned. 60 years old. Might not survive even one playback. "Then we better record it digitally while we can," Jonah said. Harold nodded and connected a digital recorder to the output. "Ready?" Claire and Jonah exchanged looks. Once they listened to this, there was no going back. "Play it," Claire said. Harold pressed the button. For a few seconds, there was only the hiss of old magnetic tape. Then voices emerged from the speakers, tinny but clear. Young voices, confident voices. Voices that thought no one would ever hear them. "Gentlemen, the opportunity is clear. The Lower Valley sits on one of the richest mineral deposits in the county, currently occupied by 70, maybe 80 Negro families with no real legal claim. They've been there 40 years, Silas. They have claim. Squatters' rights are not ownership, and even if they did, eminent domain gives us the legal framework. But eminent domain requires compensation. Compensation we don't have budget for." However, there was a pause, the sound of papers being shuffled. "If the levee were to fail during the spring rains, if the valley were to flood naturally, well, that's an act of God. No compensation required. And once the land is declared a flood zone, we can purchase it for cents on the dollar as unsuitable for habitation." Another voice, older, bureaucratic. "You're talking about destroying the levee deliberately. I'm talking about not repairing weaknesses we know exist. About making sure that when nature takes its course, it takes its course definitively. People will die, Silas. People die in floods all the time. It's tragic. We hold a memorial, we rebuild, and we make sure the rebuild benefits everyone, not just a handful of squatters." Claire's face was white. Jonah felt sick. The recording continued for another 30 minutes. Detailed discussions of how to weaken the levee without leaving evidence, which state inspectors could be bribed, how to time the failure with the spring rains, how to ensure the flooding would be severe enough that no one would want to return. When the tape finally ended, The only sound was the mechanical click of the reel spinning empty. Harold stopped the machine. His hands were shaking worse now. I remember the flood. I was 21. Did a live broadcast from the evacuation center. Saw the bodies. Saw families destroyed. And the whole time, Silas Thorne was there, helping with rescue efforts. Looking like a hero. Because he knew exactly when it would happen, Claire said quietly. He knew because he made it happen. Jonah stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the dark street. There are 4 more tapes. What else is on them? Only one way to find out, Harold said. They listened through the night. The second tape contained recordings from the weeks leading up to the flood. Thomas Bennett had hidden microphones in the courthouse, in Thorne's office, in the quarry administrative building. Every conversation was evidence of conspiracy, of deliberate mass murder dressed up as natural disaster. The third tape was the hardest to listen to. It was recorded the day after the flood. Silas Thorne and his associates discussing how to handle the cleanup, which bodies to prioritize finding, which families to offer immediate buyouts before they could organize, how to control the narrative in the press. One voice asked, "What about the union organizer, Bennett?" Thorne's response was chilling. "Handle it quietly. Make it look like an accident. The man drinks. Everyone knows it. No one will question another drunk drowning." The fourth tape was Thomas Bennett's own voice, recorded in his truck. It was a confession and a will. "My name is Thomas Bennett. It's May 15th, 1964. In 3 days, I'm supposed to meet with a reporter from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch who says he can get this story national attention, but I don't think I'm going to make it to that meeting. Silas Thorne knows I'm on to him. His people have been following me. My phone is tapped. My mail is being intercepted. If you're hearing this, it means I was right to be afraid. It means they killed me. But it also means you found what I hid. You found the truth. I'm not a brave man. I'm terrified. But I can't live in a town built on mass murder and pretend I don't know. 73 people died because of greed. 73 people whose names won't even be remembered because the Thornes control the records, control the history, control everything. So I'm leaving this. All of it. The evidence. The recordings. The proof. I don't know if it will be enough, but at least I tried. At least someone will know the truth, even if it takes 60 years to come out. To whoever finds this, be careful. The Thornes don't forgive. They don't forget. And they own this town more completely than any deed or law can describe. If you come for them, they will come for you harder. But maybe you're braver than I am. Maybe the world has changed enough that the truth actually matters now. I hope so. Because if not, then all of this, all of these deaths, really were for nothing." The tape ended with the sound of Thomas Bennett crying. The fifth and final tape was the insurance policy its label promised. It was a recording Thomas had made accidentally, when he'd left his equipment running in the truck. It captured the moment of his own murder. Claire turned away when she heard her great-uncle begging for his life. Harold stopped the tape. "We don't need to hear the rest," he said quietly. But Jonah shook his head. "Yes, we do. Every second. Because this is what Silas Thorne is. This is what he's willing to do. And if we're going to bring him down, we need to remember exactly who we're fighting." They listened to the end. To the sound of Thomas Bennett being beaten. To Cale Drummond's younger voice saying, "Make it look like he drowned." To the splash of a body being thrown into the river. When it was over, Claire was shaking with rage. Jonah felt cold, clinical. This wasn't just evidence anymore. This was war. "We need copies," Jonah said. "Multiple copies, stored in different locations." Harold nodded. "I can digitize everything tonight. Create encrypted files. But then what? If you go public, they'll kill you before it matters. If you go to the police, half of them are on Thorne's payroll. We need leverage," Jonah said. "Something that makes us more valuable alive than dead." Claire turned to him. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking we set a trap. We let Thorne know we have the tapes. We let him make a move. And when he does, we make sure the whole world is watching." "That's insane. You have a better idea?" Claire thought for a moment, then shook her head. "Actually, I might. The Centennial Gala. Every politician, every media outlet in the region will be there. Thorne is planning to use it as a platform to announce his retirement and pass his legacy to his son. It's supposed to be this grand celebration of everything Blind River has become. So we turn it into his trial," Jonah said. "How?" Jonah smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. "We hijack the audio system, broadcast these tapes over the speakers. Let Silas Thorne's own voice condemn him in front of everyone he's trying to impress." Harold looked between them like they'd lost their minds. "You can't be serious." The security at that event will be massive, and even if you somehow got access to the sound system, Thorne would shut it down in seconds. Not if we transmit it wirelessly from the dam's emergency frequency, the same one used for flood warnings. By law, that frequency can't be jammed or shut down during an emergency broadcast. Claire's eyes widened. And we could trigger an emergency broadcast by threatening the dam itself, Jonah finished. I'm an engineer. I know exactly how much pressure those floodgates can handle. And I know how to make it look like the dam is about to fail without actually destroying it. You want to threaten the entire town? I want to make sure Thorne can't silence us this time. The emergency broadcast system automatically overrides every speaker in Blind River. Phones, radios, the gala's sound system, everything. And by law, people are required to listen. It was insane. It was dangerous. It was probably illegal. It was also the only plan that had a chance of working. We have 3 weeks until the gala, Claire said. We need to prepare everything. Get the tapes digitized and secured. Plan the route to the dam. Figure out how to trigger the emergency system. And stay alive, Harold added. Because the minute Thorne realizes you're moving against him, he'll unleash everything he has. As if summoning a demon by speaking its name, Jonah's phone buzzed. Unknown number. He answered on speaker. Silas Thorne's voice was exactly as it sounded on the 60-year-old recordings. Cultured. Precise. Terrifying in its calm. Mr. Gable, I understand you've been busy this evening, visiting old friends, listening to old stories. I wanted to call personally to express how much I admire your curiosity. Curiosity is the mark of an intelligent man. Jonah said nothing. However, Thorne continued, there's a fine line between curiosity and foolishness. I'd hate for you to cross that line. You've already lost so much. Your pension, your reputation, your future. Why risk losing the only thing you have left? And what's that? Your life, Mr. Gable. Your life. The line went dead. Harold was pale. He knows you're here. How? Claire demanded. Jonah looked at his phone, then smashed it against the floor. Probably tracking software. Cale must have installed it when he confiscated my phone last year during the pension hearings. We need to move, Claire said. Now. But as they gathered the tapes and equipment, Harold walked to his window and looked out at the street. His face went white. Too late. 4 SUVs were pulling up outside. Doors opened and men got out. Not just Cale. 6 deputies, all armed, all moving with military precision toward Harold's house. They were trapped. Jonah moved fast, grabbed the digitized files Harold had created and shoved them into a waterproof case. Back door? Leads to the rail yard, Harold said. But they'll have it covered. They'll have everything covered, Claire said. We need a distraction. Jonah looked at the rows of electronic equipment, the decades of collected technology. Harold, you have a radio transmitter that can reach the whole town? The old emergency broadcast antenna. Haven't used it in years, but it's still functional. Why? Because we're going to make them think we're doing exactly what they're afraid of. Claire, grab that microphone. Harold, fire up the transmitter. What are you planning? To make Silas Thorne believe we're about to broadcast everything right now. Give him something immediate to chase while we get away. Harold's hands worked fast despite their shaking, powering up equipment that hadn't been used since the analog era. The emergency broadcast system antenna hummed to life. Jonah handed the microphone to Claire. Talk. Make it sound desperate. Make it sound like we're cornered and about to go nuclear. Claire understood immediately. She pressed the button, and her voice transmitted across every emergency frequency in the county. My name is Claire Bennett. I'm a journalist. In my possession are recordings from 1964 that prove Judge Silas Thorne deliberately caused the Blind River flood that killed 73 people. If anything happens to me, these recordings will be released to every major news outlet in America. Judge Thorne, I know you're listening. This ends tonight. The truth comes out, or... Jonah cut the transmission. That's enough. They'll trace the signal, but it'll take them a minute. Harold, is there a way out through the radio equipment room? There's a utility tunnel that connects to the old telephone exchange building 2 blocks over, built during the Cold War. Show us. As they moved through Harold's cluttered house, they could hear voices outside. Cale's amplified voice. Jonah Gable, Claire Bennett, you're surrounded. Come out with your hands visible. No one needs to get hurt. Harold led them to a heavy metal door concealed behind a rack of vacuum tubes. He spun the combination lock with practiced ease. The door opened with a hiss of preserved air. This tunnel was supposed to be for government continuity in case of nuclear attack. Goes all the way to the old exchange building. From there, you can get to the rail yard. You're not coming? Claire asked. Harold smiled sadly. I'm 76 years old. I've lived in fear of these men my whole life. Tonight, I stop running. You two go. Finish what Thomas Bennett started. Harold! Go! Jonah and Claire descended into the tunnel. Harold sealed the door behind them and walked back to his front entrance. He opened the door before Cale could knock. Evening, deputy. What can I do for you? The tunnel was pitch black, narrow, and smelled of rust and earth. Jonah used his phone's flashlight. The smashed one had been a decoy. His real phone was in his jacket, to navigate. Claire followed close behind, her breathing echoing in the confined space. You think Harold will be okay? She whispered. Harold made his choice. He's buying us time. We need to use it. They moved as fast as the darkness allowed, following the tunnel as it curved under Blind River's old downtown. After what felt like an hour, but was probably only 15 minutes, they reached a ladder leading up to a metal hatch. Jonah climbed and pushed. The hatch resisted, then gave way with a screech of protesting metal. They emerged into the abandoned telephone exchange building, a relic from the 1950s filled with rusted equipment and decades of bird droppings. Through the broken windows, they could see the rail yard Harold had mentioned. Beyond that, the old lumber mill where Jonah had left the truck. We need to get to the truck, Jonah said. It's the only vehicle I have that isn't tracked. They'll be watching it. I know, but we don't have a choice. They moved through the shadows, using the industrial decay of Blind River's abandoned factories as cover. In its heyday, this had been a thriving lumber town. Now it was a ghost district, kept preserved by the Thorne family as a historic site, but really just left to rot because it wasn't profitable. The truck was where Jonah had left it, hidden behind the mill, but Claire grabbed his arm before he could approach. Look. 2 men sat in a car across the street, watching the truck. Amateurs. Thorne's security was stretched thin, trying to cover every location simultaneously. I can draw them off, Claire said. You get the truck started. No. We stay together. Jonah, we don't have time to argue. In 60 seconds, they're going to realize Harold's house was a diversion and start sweeping the area. We need to move now. She was right, and Jonah hated it. Go. But be careful. Claire slipped around the building, making just enough noise to draw attention. The men in the car heard it, exchanged words, and both got out to investigate. Jonah ran to the truck. The key was already in the ignition. He'd left it there, figuring no one would steal a rust bucket this obvious. He turned it, and the engine roared to life with surprising strength. The men heard it and spun around, but Claire was already running back, and Jonah had the passenger door open. She dove in as Jonah threw the truck into gear and gunned it. Bullets shattered the rear window. Jonah kept his foot down, the old Chevy surging forward with more power than its appearance suggested. The watchers scrambled for their car, but Jonah had a head start. He took the turn onto Highway 19 at 60 miles per hour, the truck's suspension screaming in protest. Claire was checking the rear-view mirror. They're following. I know. Where are we going? Jonah's jaw was set, his hands tight on the wheel. Somewhere they can't follow easily. Somewhere with cover. The old quarry road. That road hasn't been maintained in 30 years. Exactly. He took a hard left onto a dirt track that wound up into the hills. The truck bounced violently over ruts and rocks. But Jonah knew this terrain. Had spent months surveying it for the county before his career imploded. The chase car tried to follow, but its lower clearance couldn't handle the rough track. Jonah watched in the mirror as it bottomed out on a rock and stopped, steam rising from its damaged oil pan. But the victory was temporary. The radio chatter on the police scanner, a modification Thomas Bennett had left in the truck, revealed that Cale was coordinating a wider net. They had maybe an hour before every road out of Blind River was blocked. Claire was examining the truck's interior more carefully now, running her hands over the modified dashboard. Your great-uncle was paranoid, Jonah said. In the best possible way. He knew they were going to kill him. He turned this truck into a rolling evidence locker. Claire found another hidden switch. Jonah, what's this? He glanced over. Don't know. Try it. She flipped the switch. A compartment opened beneath the dashboard, revealing something neither of them expected. A portable radio transmitter, vintage but operational, and a handwritten note. If you're reading this, you found the tapes. Good. But evidence isn't enough. You need witnesses. I've marked 3 locations on the map where the levee was deliberately weakened. Physical evidence. Structural modifications that can't be explained as natural failure. The proof is in the concrete itself. Make them look. Make them see. TB. A folded map fell from the compartment. Claire opened it. 3 locations were circled in red, all along the river near where the levee had failed in 1964. He's right, Jonah said. his engineering mind engaging immediately. Audio recordings can be dismissed as fabricated, but structural evidence, modifications to the levee that could only have been done deliberately, that's physical proof that can be independently verified. We need to go there, document everything before they destroy it. They might not even know it exists. If Thorne thought the tapes were the only evidence, he might never have bothered removing the structural proof. Claire looked at the map. The first location is only 10 miles from here. We could get there tonight, photograph everything, and then… Her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen and went pale. What? It's from Harold's number. She opened the message. It was a photo of Harold, bruised and bloodied, tied to a chair. The text below read, "You have until dawn to surrender the evidence. Every hour you don't, Mr. Voss pays the price. Judge Thorne." Jonah's hands tightened on the wheel. Claire stared at the photo, her face a mask of guilt and rage. We have to go back. We can't let them torture him. That's what they want. They want us emotional, want us to make mistakes. Jonah, they're torturing a 76-year-old man. And if we go back, they'll torture us too, and Harold's sacrifice will mean nothing. Jonah pulled the truck over and turned to face her. Listen to me. Harold knew what he was doing. He bought us time. The only way to honor that is to finish this. To get the structural evidence, combine it with the tapes, and make sure the truth comes out. If we get caught now, Harold dies for nothing. Claire's eyes filled with tears. I hate that you're right. So do I. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the choice crushing them both. Then Jonah put the truck back in gear. We have until dawn. Let's make it count. The first location marked on Thomas Bennett's map was a section of the old levee that had been preserved as part of the Blind River Historical Park. Ironic, Jonah thought, that Thorne had turned the site of his crime into a tourist attraction. They approached at midnight, parking the truck a half-mile away and hiking in through the woods. The park was closed, fenced off with simple chain link that was easy to bypass. Jonah brought his phone for its camera and flashlight. Claire carried a digital recorder. They moved silently through the darkness until they reached the section of levee Thomas had marked. In the moonlight, it looked like any other part of the old flood control system. Concrete and earth, weathered by decades. But Jonah knew what to look for. He'd spent years designing structures like this. Here, he said, pointing to a seam in the concrete. This shouldn't be here. Levees are poured in continuous sections to avoid weak points. This seam is deliberate. He ran his hands along it, feeling the gap. There should be rebar connecting these sections. There isn't. Someone removed it and resealed the surface to hide the modification. Claire was recording everything, narrating for the camera. This is the Blind River Levee, Section 12, as marked on Thomas Bennett's map. We're documenting structural modifications that would have deliberately weakened the levee's integrity. Jonah used a knife to chip away at the concrete around the seam. It crumbled easily. Far more easily than 60-year-old concrete should. This was replaced recently, maybe 15, 20 years ago. Someone came back and tried to hide the evidence, but they did it wrong, used the wrong concrete mixture. Can you prove it was sabotaged? Any structural engineer could confirm this in 10 minutes. This levee was designed to fail. And when someone came back to cover it up, they left more evidence of tampering. They documented everything, measurements, photographs, close-ups of the seam. Then moved to the second location marked on the map. This one was underwater, accessible only by a culvert that ran under the current river channel. Jonah hadn't brought diving equipment, but the culvert was shallow enough to wade through. I'll go, he said. You keep watch. Jonah, someone needs to stay dry and mobile. If I don't come back in 15 minutes, leave. Get the evidence we already have to someone who can use it. He didn't wait for her to argue. Stripped off his jacket and waded into the cold November water. The culvert was dark and claustrophobic, but Thomas Bennett's map was precise. 20 feet in, Jonah found what he was looking for. A section of the culvert's reinforcing structure that had been cut through and replaced with non-structural materials. He photographed everything with his waterproof phone case, his hands numb from the cold. This was deliberate. This was proof, and Thorne's people had either never found it or assumed no one would look for evidence underwater. When Jonah emerged, shivering, Claire wrapped him in his jacket. Did you find it? Everything Thomas said would be there. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't negligence. This was engineered murder. They moved to the third location, but as they approached, Jonah saw tire tracks in the mud. Fresh tracks. Someone else had been here recently. They're ahead of us, Claire whispered. They crept closer and saw two men with portable floodlights, chipping away at a section of the original levee, destroying evidence. One of the men was Cale Drummond. Jonah pulled Claire back into the shadows. They couldn't approach, couldn't stop the destruction. All they could do was watch as Cale's team systematically removed the physical evidence Thomas Bennett had marked. "They're erasing it," Claire said, her voice hollow. "Not all of it. We got 2 locations documented. That's enough. And they don't know we have Thomas's modifications to the truck itself." "What modifications?" Jonah smiled grimly. Thomas Bennett turned his truck into a mobile recording studio. The microphones in the dashboard aren't just for recording inside the cab. They're directional, long range. He could record conversations from hundreds of feet away. So the truck has been sitting in county storage for 60 years. Every conversation that happened near it got recorded, including, he checked the truck's hidden archive logs, conversations between county officials about the levee inspection in 2003, which means we have proof they knew about the structural problems and covered them up. Claire's eyes widened. The conspiracy isn't just historical, it's ongoing. Exactly. This isn't about what Thorne did in 1964. It's about what he's still doing now. They retreated to the truck and spent the next 3 hours going through the archived recordings Thomas's system had inadvertently captured. Most of it was useless. Wind, rain, distant traffic. But scattered throughout were fragments of conversations. County inspectors discussing how to word reports to avoid liability. Maintenance crews being told to ignore problems. And in one crystal-clear recording from 2015, Silas Thorne himself. "The levee is a liability, always has been. But we don't fix liabilities, we manage them. If it fails again, we'll rebuild. And we'll use federal disaster money to do it. The town benefits either way." "He's still willing to let people die," Claire said. "Even now. Even after everything." Jonah looked at the dashboard clock. 4:30 a.m. 2 hours until dawn. Until Thorne's deadline. "We can't save Harold by surrendering, but we can make sure his torture ends quickly." "How?" "We move up the timeline. We don't wait for the gala. We broadcast everything now." "Jonah, we're not ready. We don't have control of the emergency broadcast system. We don't have protection. We have the truck, Thomas's transmitter, and we have the one place in Blind River where we're guaranteed an audience." "Where?" Jonah started the engine. "The dam." The Blind River Dam was a monument to the Thorne family's power. Built with federal money in 1968 as flood control, it had really been about controlling the water rights and hydroelectric profits. The dam's visitor center sat at the base of the structure, and every morning at 6 a.m., shift workers arrived for the day's operations. Jonah and Claire arrived at 5:45 a.m., 15 minutes before the first workers. The truck's bulk and official-looking modifications let them pass the minimal security without question. Night guards assumed they were contractors. They parked near the dam's emergency broadcast tower, the same one used to warn downstream communities about controlled releases. The same one that, by federal law, couldn't be shut down or jammed. Jonah connected Thomas Bennett's portable transmitter to the tower's feed, while Claire organized the audio files. They had one shot at this. Once they started broadcasting, they'd have maybe 10 minutes before Thorne's people cut power to the entire facility. At 6 a.m., the shift workers began arriving, 30 people, then 40, all of them Blind River residents who would become immediate witnesses. At 6:05, Jonah triggered the emergency broadcast system. Sirens wailed across the county. Every radio, every phone, every emergency receiver activated automatically, including the ones in Judge Silas Thorne's house and in Cale Drummond's truck, and in the Blind River Sheriff's Department. Claire's voice went out over the emergency frequency. "This is Claire Bennett. What you're about to hear is the truth about Blind River, about how this town was built, about who built it, and about what they were willing to do to protect their power." Then Silas Thorne's voice from 1964 filled the airwaves. Every word of that first meeting, every casual discussion of mass murder, every cold calculation about how many people were acceptable collateral. Workers stopped, stared at their radios. Some tried to turn them off, but emergency broadcasts can't be silenced by user controls. Jonah watched as realization spread across their faces. Some looked sick. Some looked angry. All of them looked betrayed. The broadcast continued. Thomas Bennett's voice explaining what he'd discovered. The recording of his own murder. The modern conversations proving the conspiracy was ongoing. Then Jonah added his own voice. "My name is Jonah Gable. I'm a structural engineer. I've examined the Blind River levee. The damage in 1964 was deliberate, and the current structure still contains the same sabotaged sections. This dam, this town, is built on murder, and the people responsible are still in power." That's when the SUVs arrived. 6 of them, led by Cale Drummond. But they couldn't stop the broadcast. It was already out, already duplicating across every emergency receiver in the region. Cale got out of his vehicle, his face twisted with rage. He drew his weapon. "Shut it down! Now!" Jonah stood his ground. "Can't. Federal law. Emergency broadcasts can't be interrupted. I will shoot you where you stand." "Go ahead. There are 40 witnesses here. All of them hearing what your boss did. All of them recording this on their phones. You shoot me, you prove everything we just said." Cale hesitated. The workers were indeed recording. Some were live streaming. The situation was spiraling beyond control. Then a new voice cut through the chaos, amplified through a megaphone. "Deputy Drummond, lower your weapon." Everyone turned. A black sedan had arrived, and from it stepped Agent Sarah Chen of the FBI, flanked by a team of federal marshals. "We've been monitoring this frequency," Chen said calmly. "We've heard the broadcasts, and we have some questions for Judge Thorne, as well as warrants for his arrest on charges of conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice, and violation of civil rights under color of law." Kyle looked around like a trapped animal. The workers were closing in, their faces hostile. The federal agents had him surrounded. There was nowhere to run. He dropped his weapon. The next hour was chaos. More federal agents arrived. Blind River's sheriff was arrested along with Cale. Judge Silas Thorne was taken into custody at his home, dressed in his judicial robes as if he'd been preparing to hold court. Harold Voss was found alive, beaten but stable. He'd refused to tell them anything, had endured torture without breaking. When they brought him to the dam, still bloody, the first thing he did was hug Claire and Jonah. "You did it," Harold whispered. "Thomas would be proud." The media descended on Blind River like locusts. By noon, the story was national news. By evening, it was international. The recordings went viral. Structural engineers from 3 universities confirmed Jonah's findings about the levee. Historians began excavating records of the 1964 flood, finding inconsistencies and covered-up evidence. Everything the Thorne family had built began to crumble. Judge Silas Thorne was arraigned on 73 counts of manslaughter, conspiracy to commit murder, and numerous federal charges. The trial would take years, but the evidence was overwhelming. Even his expensive lawyers couldn't create reasonable doubt when his own voice confessed to the crimes. Jonah and Claire sat by the river 1 week later, watching the water flow past. The truck was gone, resting at the bottom of the dam where it had served its final purpose, as the transmitter that broke the silence. "Your pension?" Claire asked. "They're reviewing the case. Turns out the judge who ruled against me was appointed by Thorne. Every decision he made is being re-examined." "That's good. Maybe. Doesn't change what I lost, but..." Jonah looked at the water. "I got something else back. Something I thought I'd lost forever." "What's that?" "The ability to look in a mirror without hating what I see." Claire nodded. She understood. She'd gotten the same thing. The validation that her great-uncle hadn't been crazy. That the questions she'd been asking her whole life weren't paranoia. "I'm writing the book," she said. "The real history of Blind River. Thomas's story. The flood. All of it." "Good. Someone should." They sat in comfortable silence until Claire asked the question that had been bothering her. "Why did he do it?" "Thomas. He knew they would kill him. Why not just run?" Jonah thought about that. Thought about his own choices. About why he'd risked everything to expose the truth. Because running meant living with it. Living knowing what happened and doing nothing. Thomas couldn't do that. Neither could we. "No," Claire agreed. "Neither could we." A month later, as the trial proceedings began, the town of Blind River started the painful process of acknowledging its real history. A memorial was erected for the 73 people who died in the flood. Their names finally recorded. Their deaths finally recognized as murder rather than accident. Thomas Bennett's truck was recovered from the bottom of the dam, and what remained of it was placed in a museum as a symbol of one man's courage against systemic corruption. Jonah got his pension back, got his life back, started a consulting firm helping small towns identify structural problems in their infrastructure before those problems became disasters. Claire's book became a bestseller. She won a Pulitzer for journalism, specifically for her coverage of the Blind River case. Harold Voss lived another 10 years, long enough to see justice served. When he died, they buried him next to Thomas Bennett, whose grave finally had the headstone it deserved. Thomas Bennett, 1923-1964. He spoke truth when silence was easier. Judge Silas Thorne died in prison 2 years into his sentence. No one mourned him. But sometimes, late at night, Jonah and Claire would meet at the river and remember what it took to break the silence. The fear. The doubt. The moments when it seemed easier to just let the past stay buried. They'd remember Thomas Bennett, who knew he was going to die but left the truth behind anyway. They'd remember Harold, who stopped running when he was 76 years old. They'd remember the moment when they chose to fight instead of flee. And they'd remember that sometimes, against all odds, the truth does come out. Justice does arrive. The powerful do fall. It just takes people brave enough to make it happen. The river kept flowing, washing away the old lies, making space for a new truth. Blind River would never be the same. But maybe, finally, it could become something honest, something worth building a life on. The silence was broken, and in its place, finally, was the sound of truth being told. If you enjoyed this story, click on the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable story, where destiny and courage meet in ways you never imagined. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.